All right. Good evening, everybody. Before we call the meeting to order here, I want to acknowledge Lee Hallman. Mr. Hallman will be absent this evening, and Chris Boyd is en route and should be joining us in a couple minutes. With that said, we will call the meeting to order. Oh, sorry.
Trina.
Okay, I didn't know that one. I apologize. Trina Loomis will also not be joining us this evening. All right, now the first order of business. We're going to go ahead and consider the approval of the February 27, 2024 regular meeting minutes. I'm assuming everyone has had a chance to review those. Is there any questions, changes, concerns regarding them? Looks like none. Just so we can stall for Chris, are you sure? No, okay. All right, I'll take a motion then.
I would like to make a motion to approve.
All right. Do I have a second?
Second.
Yeah, any discussion on that? Okay. All those in favor? Seeing any opposed? And you are abstaining because you weren't here. Understood. All righty. Next up, public comments. No one has actually signed up to speak. So we will move on to our action agenda for this evening. First item on the agenda, we're going to consider a recommendation on petition TA 24-01. This is a request by the Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment to the zoning ordinance to bring that text into compliance with North Carolina House Bill 600.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to put my staff report in the record for TA 24-01 to comply with House Bill 600. So House Bill 600 adds amendments to language in NC General Statutes 143-2214.7 regarding stormwater runoff rules. The zoning ordinance will then be amended with minor language changes to reflect updated state statutes. The language is taken directly from that state statute. Will not constitute a change in practice for stormwater administration, and staff will be making changes to the articles below to reflect those updates. Here we have two references from the ordinance. The highlighted and underlined text is what's being added, and the language being struck through is being removed. I'm going to go to the next slide. It's the same language throughout each reference in the articles. It's pretty heavy with stormwater jargon. I made a simple explanation that helped me and hopefully will help y'all understand a little bit better. Here we have that text simplified, the highlighted text being the addition. I'll allow y'all to read that quickly. So that highlighted text isn't going to change anything in our day-to-day stormwater practice. The way I like to describe it, it's a qualifier or clarifies, maybe even answers a question that the reader might have. Staff recommends approval of the proposed text amendment to comply with House Bill 600. And on January 4th, the HOAB recommended approval with a vote of 8-0. Town board final action is scheduled for April 15th. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. I actually have a question, and this one would actually be both for planning staff and legal. I can ask it separately, but it's really the same question. Given that this is to come into compliance for adopted language and a couple text amendment changes ago with compliance, there was some issue. We did it, and then afterwards, some folks, actually, it was a few months ago, folks in the town had some issue with the bill itself and are now looking to go back to the state level and try and change it. So I just wanted to ask up front then, is there anything within the changes here in House Bill 600 that either the planning department or legal has any issue with and would want the town as an entity to push back against?
No, we're fine with these rules, and as Patrick stated earlier, this doesn't change how we practice in implementing our stormwater rules. It's just some jargon updates.
Okay,
All right?
that works. Good. Okay, thank you. Yes, sir.
This may not be as relevant to the text amendment, but just so I understand what House Bill 600 did. As an example, if I have 2-acre property and I've got a 20,000 square foot building on it with another 40,000 square feet of impervious area, I can tear that building down, really do any site work I want to, as long as I don't exceed the previous impervious. Is that?
You get credit for what's out there today.
And that was not the case before?
You just reworded it,
Okay,
all right? For us, we're treating it exactly the same as was practiced before.
because that's what it was before, right? That's what I thought. Thank you, Brian.
Okay, other questions?
Well, first I'll say I don't see anything that would keep this from going forward with a recommendation of approval. But I'll go back to ask a question about wording. And I'm going to get the wrong place here, aren't I? In section 2E5, the top of page 2, there was just grammar. They left in a comma, and what was left of a strike over, it looks like a dash after election. That's going to be removed. That's just a house cleaning thing. I don't think that has to be in a motion.
We'll take care of that.
Yeah, the dash is a strike through. Yes, so that is saying that the comma will be removed. That is deleting the comma.
Okay? That's all I have.
Any other questions? No? Okay, I will entertain a motion.
In considering the proposed amendment, TA 24-01, the planning board recommends approval based on consistency with all policies of the Huntersville 2040 Community Plan and compliance with state statutes. It is reasonable in the public interest to amend the zoning ordinance because it complies with the Huntersville 2040 Community Plan and state statutes.
Okay, do I have a second? All right, thank you. Any discussion on this? Okay, all those in favor? Any opposed? All right, that one carries unanimously. All right, item 4B. We're going to consider a recommendation on petition TA 24-02, also a request by the Huntersville Planning Department for a text amendment to the zoning ordinance. And this is to clarify the town's role in permitting, placement, and enforcement of campaign signs.
Good evening. I'd like to put my staff report in the record for TA 24-02, campaign sign ordinance. TA 2402 is a text amendment request by Town of Huntersville Planning Department to amend Article 10, Section 10.109, 10.12, 10.14.3 to clarify the town's role in permitting, placement, and enforcement of campaign signs. So the amendments to Article 10.109 are to clarify that individuals must seek permission from private property owners before placing a sign. Individuals must also seek permission from any property owner fronting the town-maintained right-of-way where a sign is placed. Example would be a planting strip in that case. The amendments to section or Article 10.12 clarify that temporary campaign and election signs are allowed to extend into the right-of-way of town-maintained roads and as allowed by the North Carolina Department of Transportation along the streets that they maintain. This clarifies the town's stance on campaign signs in the right-of-way and defers to NCDOT for their right-of-way regulations. The amendments to Article 10.14.3 clarify that town staff may remove any illegal sign placed on town property or town-maintained right-of-way. Staff recommends approval of the proposed text amendment as it clarifies the town's role in permitting placement and enforcement of campaign signs. On January 4th, the Huntersville Ordinance Advisory Board recommended approval with a vote of 7-0 to 1, with a recommendation to add a reference to NC General Statutes 136-32 B, C, D, E, and F in Article 10.109D, so that anyone reading the ordinance understands that there is another standard for state-maintained roads. Town Board final action scheduled for April 15th. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. I actually have a couple questions for you. Could you describe the rationale from a planning department perspective as to why we're creating separate rules from what we'll say town-owned land versus, we'll just assume it's private owner land? That would fall under the state rules?
So
Why are we carving out a
separating
separation?
from, are you talking about private property or NCDOT maintained?
DOT maintained right-of-ways versus town-maintained right-of-ways, or whether it's town property versus,
Public property, just general public property?
yeah,
Yeah, really it comes down to who maintains or owns that property. State laws and regulations prevent us from enforcing our rules on their maintained land and vice versa. So basically, the state's gonna take care of their maintained highways, and we'll take care of ours.
so if it wasn't delineated, then theoretically, there wouldn't be any enforcement allowed because the state couldn't do it.
Correct. Yeah,
So, yeah.
we're just trying to make sure everything's very clear. Whose role is it in maintaining these? There was some questioning during the last election about who was responsible for the enforcement of these signs and the regulations. So this is really just a clarification. So moving forward, there's no more confusion as to who is responsible for the maintenance and potentially removal of signs.
Gotcha, okay. Sure.
To follow up on that, so if it is town, just because I'm curious,
Sure.
if it is town, who is responsible? Is that the planning staff?
Yes, we have zoning code enforcement officers that will take care of that.
They email you, call you, or is there?
Well, we get,
Both.
you name it, carrier pigeon, we'll take care of it anyway. As long as we'll go out there, we'll do an inspection to make sure it's actually a violation. If it is, we will offer a correction, to the candidate. Most times it's a quick phone call, hey, this is out here, could you move that? And I haven't seen them yet not move it. They want their name out there, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Chambers, from your perspective, same rationale behind it? Is there anything additional from a legal perspective beyond the explanation they gave?
No, I mean, the reasoning behind the change is because in the NCDOT statute, you only need to be granted permission from certain owners. There's a couple cases where if you're a candidate, you could place your sign in somebody's yard and not need their permission. Those cases are limited, but there are certain cases where a candidate could do that. We just wanted to clarify, and previously, we hadn't clarified that it was only town-maintained roads that our zoning officers could take signs from if it was illegally placed. So we wanted to clarify that, one, like Brian said, we could only take it from town-maintained roads or enforce town-maintained roads. And two, we wanted to specify that you needed permission from every property owner.
Gotcha.
So that is the only difference.
And actually, while you're up there, if I could, regarding 9E, there's a phrase in there and it says, or it's claiming either a number of days, and then it says, or the third Thursday prior to the election date. That's, why is that carved out, the difference? Is it meant to be like a whichever comes first type scenario, or?
Yes, I believe so. And I think that might just be language similar to what the just Board of Elections and the original NCDOT statute has. I don't have that in front of me, but I know they just have certain, timing dates. So I imagine where that came from. But yes, I believe it would be whichever's earlier.
Okay, great, thank you. And for planning staff, regarding 9B, what is a fully controlled access highway?
The easiest way to explain that would be any of our interstate interchanges, so that would be exit 23, 25, as well as the direct connect on Hambright Road.
All right. And so then, as of now, so I truly didn't know what that statement meant, so thank you. And then that would also mean that we don't have any town maintained at this time.
Correct.
Okay. And then I had a question about 9D. Talks about a property fronting a town-maintained road. What if, this is kind of obscure, and the one property I have in my head would be like Old Statesville and Stumptown. So either the northwest parcel or the southwest parcel, it's town-maintained road, Stumptown,
Correct.
state-maintained on Old Statesville, which is one of the property's
Right,
borders.
With the mental picture.
What do we
Depends on
do?
where the sign would be located. So if you were to be, let's say you're in the southeast corner, for example,
Mm-hmm.
at the farm there. If you were to have the sign fronting Stumptown Road, we would take care of it. If it was on the western part facing 21, then the state would enforce that.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right?
All right, good, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for staff?
The only question I had was, it says shall be removed within 10 days. Is there any kind of penalty with that? You just contact them if it starts to linger into 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and they go get it?
Yeah, so-
Or we go pick it up and fine them?
Right, so we always give a verbal warning to folks. They have 10 days to take corrective action. If at the end, we can either remove the sign ourselves, or we can potentially leave the sign and fine them. So, but you have to give them that grace period to go to correct the action. Sure. Yeah. Like I said, I have yet to have someone, if we've called someone and say, hey, your sign's in the wrong spot, I've yet to see someone not go move it, or they give us permission to move it for them. We try to let them do it so we don't get involved, but, not yet.
A follow-up to your question about 30 days. I just looked at the numbers and did the math, if I got it correct. Third Thursday is 28 days before the election. So it's 30 days or 28 days. I would ask you to take a look at that. Maybe my math was off, maybe, because it's saying two different things.
So before early voting?
Before early voting, the 28th day before that is the third Thursday.
That's how this year's calendar falls. I'm not saying that's always the case.
Yeah, I just assume that it could be different in different years, and that's why it's written that way. It could be 28 days, it could be 31 days.
Well, early voting always starts on a Saturday, right?
Early voting starts on a Thursday,
A Thursday, I gotcha.
and so the 3 Thursdays before that.
Yeah, we can look into see if that's.
I'm not asking, you, just take a look at
Yeah,
that,
if-
see if that makes sense or not. Maybe we need to take that third Thursday out.
Yeah, if we can clarify it to
Yeah.
make it simpler, then yeah, we can look into that.
All right.
Okay, I have another question unrelated to the text amendment. Are candidates allowed to put signs, I guess, in the right of way? My example is, let's just, Rama Church Road, you got the roundabout, you've got, I guess, the median there, and you see signs there. Candidates allowed to, by right, to put signs in state-owned?
I will defer to NCDOT on that one.
Okay,
I would discourage anybody hanging out in those areas. They can be dangerous. So, they're supposed to be, and then there's proper placement too. You need to be 3 feet from the curb, all those other parameters that we have in there. When you're in the right, inside, like in a roundabout or in a median, they should not be there. And it becomes a challenge too for DOT workers to pick those up. Same thing with us. It can be a safety issue depending on what time of day they're out there, so.
But legally, they're allowed to do it, I guess you're saying. You can actually install your sign in a DOT property?
It's a gray area.
Okay, just curious.
We'll just leave that there. We would discourage folks from hanging out in the medians and roundabouts.
Fair enough.
Might depend on how wide the median is,
Right.
because if you got to be 3 feet off
Yeah,
the road, it may not work. I'm not going to go out there and measure, but
I agree.
yeah. Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, I have some other questions, but I'm going to revisit that 30 days again. Greg just pointed out to me that if that, I believe that stated the third Tuesday before the election, that would be 30 days. But you can go back and check election days, like you were saying, Brian, maybe they're different. Because I don't have the answer to that right now, because I didn't even think about that before we came in. I'm sorry, this gets convoluted. Yeah, I have some other questions, and I was counting when you were discussing the right of access of any fully controlled access highway, so I apologize for revisiting that. Did we get the answer that Huntersville doesn't have any fully controlled?
The town does not maintain any fully controlled.
All right, so my question is, should that even be in our ordinance?
We're leaving it in there in case that becomes a situation in the future. We could maintain these things at some point in time.
Okay. I have a question about usage of word in town-maintained right-of-way. When we added that to 9D, that's sort of inconsistent with the rest of the descriptions throughout the ordinance. For example, in Section 1, you added town-maintained right-of-way in 9D, but there are four other uses of the term right-of-way without the term town-maintained preceding it. And that, to me, that causes some inconsistency or conflict in interpretation. What does that mean? Does that mean if we're going to use, either don't use town-maintained, take that out and leave it the way it is? And the other thing is, when you take a look at Section 2, Article 10.12.1, it has another uses. It says public right-of-way. So that's another. And then it uses town-maintained with hyphenated. I just,
Which one referred to public? I'm sorry.
all right, Section 1, 9D. We added town-maintained to that?
That's because we're specifying that we cannot enforce non-town maintained roads, NCDOT roads. So we need to clarify that if it's a non-town maintained road, then we're not the ones that are enforcing that. That's why
I'm sorry, excuse me, Jake, didn't mean to interrupt.
and to your point, I mean, I do understand that there are other places where it says just right of way, but this, I mean, you only need the actual enforcement structure for this is whether you get permission and when it is in a town-maintained road. I don't think it's necessary to if you're just adding that, it's just a lot of it's just more verbiage to add. I think it's clear that now that we've added it to D, that's who you need to obtain permission from. So that's kind of the enforcement structure for the whole ordinance. So that's why I think it's fine in this TA. I do understand why that it could be unclear, and we can look into possibly adding it more. But when you said that there's where it says public,
Yeah, down in Section 2, it uses the word public right away. Section 2, right at the beginning? Yeah. And 1, it says signs extending into the public right of way.
I think it's referring to just public right-of-way instead of private right-of-way, because that's both town and NCDOT maintained right-of-way.
Those are other than campaign signs. So that could,
So if you had Mr. Snyder's window washing,
Okay,
they would not be allowed to be in the right of way.
all right. I just saw it, I'm just asking a question about it. And down in section, this is no big deal, it's just a typo, I think. All right, it's in the ordinance, when you added town maintained into section 3, in the third line, you hyphenated it. That's just inconsistent, different than what it is, yeah. Different than where it is everywhere else. I just say this, I'm the only one in the room that's probably gone through this as a candidate. This is the only time we can ever talk about politics up here, guys. So I ran, and I had to live with this. So I'm really interested in us having the town having a clean, understandable document. Who knows, might have to use it again.
so I actually, I'm sure much to everyone's dismay, redlined the ordinance. Again, just to make it consistent, I think we all have a copy in front of us. So I'll just run through these real quick. In the overall, when I was going through it, this is one of those, I know a lot of the ordinances are written with a bit more of a legalese sort of flair. To me, there's a few ordinances that the public is always referencing, be it like noise ordinance, and this is another one. And I think if there's ever a time where we would break it down to a slightly more simple and clear level, it would be for this one, because I think it would save various staff members a fair amount of time in doing it. So some of the verbiage is just changing just because of that, and others was just to create consistency. But so I'll just fly through this kind of quick, like 9A, or 9A, sorry. I thought it might make it more clear to people, and again, I'm not married to all these changes, but if we gave options were 1 and 2, so we broke it out so it was a bit more clear as to the different variations here, or situations, I should say. And we've used the verbiage erected elsewhere, and originally, I think we were using located in 9A. So individual signs erected, and then privately owned property, I think sounds more clear than owner's private property. And then in that first part, it says, shall not exceed 16 square feet in area or 6 feet in height. When I see or, that tells me that I have a choice. And I don't think we're trying to show choice. And so I changed it to and. If I'm incorrect in that interpretation, by all means. And then 9A Part 2, same thing, just making the language consistent. When we get down to 9E, and also 9F, I redlined the word one-stop. The only reason I did that, again, not married to this one either, but that's naming, and I know it's in one of the ordinances already, and then was, or not ordinances, the statute, I believe. It's in the statute, but then Board of Elections language took it out. The only, my rationale behind taking it out is simply that is my understanding, is a particular kind of early voting. And if we just labeled it early voting, seeing as there's always changes to early voting, but it doesn't seem that early voting itself is ever going away. By eliminating one stop, you wouldn't have to come back and change the ordinance should early voting rules change.
May I add something?
Sure.
To be clear, State Board of Education, as Jacob pointed out to me, State Board of Election,
You said education.
excuse me. State Board of Elections still uses the term one-stop early voting. However, in the campaign, in the sign regulations, the General Statute Regulation of Signs 136-32, it back in October in House Bill 747, it removed one-stop. So I think that's a clarification. So it's one or the other. But if the Board of Elections decides tomorrow to change one stop to just early voting, so that's offered.
And then also in 9E, I rearranged where now it says any political sign that remains more than 30 days after the end of the period prescribed herein, then in full detail, it describes the location, then describes the judgment, the enforcement. And then again, with the privately owned property, the rest of them are just a couple like grammatical and consistency changes. So it's not huge. I'm just trying to make it simple because I know, I mean, this election was no different than any other, but there's drama that sparks up from that every time. I don't think whether what I wrote, I don't think is going to necessarily solve it, and I don't think having it as presented to us originally is going to solve it. I just had the idea that it might help some, so we don't have people saying, oh, well, I read this, and so I'm allowed to do this, when in fact they weren't. But that was my theory.
I was just gonna note, I think legally I'm fine with all of the changes you said. I haven't gone through it grammatically to make sure I necessarily agree with everything, but like, I think all your changes overall are fine. The only thing I would note is when you change from or to and, I would say it should stay as or because we're prohibiting something, not allowing something. So because we're prohibiting it, we're saying you can't exceed 16 square feet or you can't exceed 6 feet in height. You can't do either or. So we're not saying you have a choice to do either. We're saying you can't do either of them. So that's why I would keep it as or instead of and. I think that makes more sense. But otherwise, I think your changes are fine at first look.
I see the angle there, yeah.
One other item. I know you added it. You added reference to North Carolina General Statute 136-32, specifically F. But I think part of the issue in HOAB was part of the conflict that we had in the last election was trying to interpret individuals, not you, planning department, but just individuals out there using the ordinances and looking at the state plan, which one applied where. To me, I think we were at the HOAB, we're asking for some kind of clarification of the ordinance to point people the right way. That this ordinance is only, to remind them, this ordinance is for town roads only. For state-maintained roads in the town of Huntersville and ETJ, you should refer to North Carolina 136-32, regulation of signs. Somewhere there, so individuals, they jump to our ordinance, they have a reference back to look at what the state requires also. And I'm not sure how to word that. I would let, if Jacob agrees, I would let him word it the way he wants to word it, but.
The only thing I'll say to that is we added the reference to 136-32F because that specifically applies to, I don't have the statute in front of me, but I think that actually tells the town something we can or cannot do. So that's why we did that reference, because it specifically applies to the town. The reason that we didn't necessarily agree with adding the reference to the NCOD statute about what you can and can't do in NCDOT right-of-ways is because we could do that for every single ordinance in the entire zoning ordinance and subdivision ordinance, and that would just be a lot of references that people could add and look into. I know, to your point earlier, that making this one clearer to read for the general public could be important. So if it's something that you want to suggest in your recommendation to add, I think it's fine. It's just that's our reasoning for not adding it, because then we think we might need to add a bunch of references throughout the ordinance to a lot of statutes.
I mean, you were looking for a way to make this simple for somebody. What if there was a diagram? Just a little simple drawing, probably eliminate a lot of words, but, I mean, just a simple, hey, here's where you place it, put it right here, don't do that.
So
Well-
in our candidate forum, when we do our introductory packets, we do have a one-sheeter for signs, and it does have that diagram in it. Yep.
And that brings up a good point, and I'm not trying to add words here, Dick, to the ordinance, but maybe there needs to be a reference in this ordinance to refer to the, for candidates to refer to the Powell bill, so that they know where the roads are. The town, what are the town maintained
Double check,
roads?
but I'm pretty sure the handout for the candidates does have that reference in there, and we do have that listed online, too.
Okay,
But I'll double check that.
all right, thank you, Brian.
Okay, any other questions for staff? No? Okay. I would, actually, I know I don't normally make the motion, but seeing as I wrote a bunch of changes, it may make sense if I do it, if you guys will humor me on that. Let me think how to word this, though. So in considering petition TA 24-02, Planning Board recommends approval with modifications listed. Let me pause on this for a second. So I have what I've created, but we already have, for example, one change, which makes perfect sense now that I understand what it's actually referencing with the or versus and. I need to make a change to this document. What's the way that I can make this motion and get this properly submitted so it counts?
I would suggest first saying that you wish to add your document to the record that you handed out, and then you can say that the changes, you've recommended approval, then you will recommend the changes suggested based on the document that you entered into the record, and then just make that one change saying from and or, saying that you do not want that included, or, stick with or.
Okay. All right, that works then. All right. So I would like to add the alternate language that, that I've provided everyone this evening, the alternate language to the ordinance amendment into the public record. And then I would like to make a motion regarding this. So in considering petition TA 24-02, the planning board recommends approval with the modified language that was submitted to the public record, with one change to be noted on that document. It would be 9A, number 1. We would strike my entry of the word and leave in the original entry of or. And so with that, it is reasonable and in the public interest to amend the zoning ordinance as it does clarify the signage ordinance and rules, and hopefully makes for a better functioning election season. And I'll take a second, maybe.
Second.
There we go. All right.
We accept an amendment.
Yeah.
I would like to add, I think they're going to do this anyway, and you tell me, Brian, that it's not needed, that you're going to do it, but all references to town maintained, the term town maintained, have hyphens where they are hyphenated, that the hyphen be removed.
We will be consistent with whichever way we choose.
Okay, that's fair.
Well,
And my amendment was withdrawn, by the way.
okay. And so fair question, the consistency statement, though, I didn't reference the 2040 community plan because there's nothing in the 2040 plan about this. So the consistency statement that I tried to just go with is that it's reasonable and in the public interest to amend this as it clarifies signage ordinance. But that's all. Is that okay? Good, Chris? All right. Seeing as there was a lot of changes on the document and you guys didn't see it till here, happy to take discussion on this.
Yes. Jacob, if you don't mind, on that, I hate to belabor the and/or, but in his proposal, or maybe this might be a question for Jeff, I'm not sure. In Part 2, 9A2, you have and. 9A1, you're saying switch back to or. Do you want both of them?
So are you talking about 9A2?
Yeah, 9A1 and
Says shall
9A,
not exceed 6 feet in area and 6.5 feet in height. Is that what you're talking about? So maybe that should also be or?
I'm kind of indifferent, but it looks like if he switches what he originally suggested, it's going to be, 1 and 2 are going to be different. Do you see that, Jeff?
I do, I kept the and in there, because then when it shifts to, so in the original, excuse me, ordinance language, there's a comma and then it says and 6 square feet in area and 3.5 feet in height. And so in 9A2,
That's what I'm saying, so one's going to be or and one's going to be and.
I think changing that to or as well would also make sense.
which one where I struck out?
The 9A2, 6 square feet in area or 3.5 square feet in height. Gosh.
That's why I didn't want to bring it up. But I'm just saying, you switched it to match, and now we're switching it back to mismatch.
That's right. It's not consistent.
Yeah.
We will look into the exact grammar and make a decision about what we think is better. One other, and just another note, now that I've seen it, there should be a semicolon after the word height in 9A1. But again, we can look at the grammar and make sure that all the grammar is exactly perfected on the versions that the town board sees.
More discussion?
More discussion.
Okay.
Thank you, Jacob.
But before Jacob leaves, just, I appreciate that. The thing I think we're looking at is consistency in word usage, so you don't interpret it being one thing here and another thing there when it's actually saying the same thing. That's the only thing that we're seeing. And some of the things that were not added into the motion that we discussed tonight, I would appreciate it if you would look at those and consider those to see if there's something there.
Like the Thursday, third Thursday.
Yeah, or just totally eliminate that. Geez, I don't know how you, just like he said, if you have a primary in March, how do you adjust for 29 days in February? I don't want even, my mind boggles.
We will look into those, and we will have a version in red line / ordinance that the board can see all those changes into one document.
Okay.
All right. Nothing further.
Any other discussion on that? No? Okay. All those in favor? Any opposed? And seeing none, that motion carries unanimously. We're moving on to other business, of which there is none. So that means I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Any opposed? Seeing none, have a good night.
44 minutes again. Which is weird. I'm gonna